Welcome to another episode of Data Gurus. I'm so excited to welcome Matt Celuszak, who is the co-founder and CEO of Element Human. Welcome, Matt.
Thanks for having me here, Sima. Lots
Um,
of interesting stuff to talk about.
yeah. And I love the shirt that you're wearing. It inspires goodness.
Yeah, it's colorful. I don't want to be stuck in a box.
Well, usually I wear black, so I'm wearing a little bit of different color
You
as
go.
well.
You got your summer colors out today.
There
That's
you
great.
go. There you go. I'm so excited to talk about some really critical concepts that your company is addressing, and kind of also based on some key perspectives that you believe. Before we dive into that, I'd love just to talk a little bit about your journey as to how you got here.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that. I mean, I got started at university. I was doing my degree in human kinetics, which is around kind of anatomy, physiology, biology, and very grounded in the world of sport. And one of the challenges that was kind of brought up that kind of hooked me into this idea. So Element Human is a human data company.
Yeah.
And what hooked me to this idea around can we use technology to understand ourselves and each other better was when a cross country coach came to me and said, my cross country team just isn't training. They're drinking, they're doing the university thing, but they're not training. And that's when we've all been there. And so what was really interesting about it is he said, can you help me with this? I said, well, are you sharing the VO2 max data with them? They're like, what, lung capacity data.
Right.
And we were using sensors to try it out. He goes, well, no. And I said, well, why not? He said, well, because I need to know that. And then I translate it for them. I said, well, have you ever thought maybe if we just box up the translation, hand it to them, they might respond a little bit better because we're finding good correlations with lung capacity and performance at the races. And so he said, all right, great, I'll give that a try. And so he tried it. And then he came back about 4 or 5 months later saying, okay, I now have another problem. I said, what's that? And he goes, they're now training too hard. They won't stop trying to compete on lung capacity. I was like, so I think it just goes back to people manage what they can measure. And that's how I fell into the world of measurement. Then I went to, the first job was an internship and then ended up working at IMG to help build sponsorship measurement platforms for brands because they were spending millions to hundreds of millions of dollars on people like Tiger Woods. And how do you put a value on that and a return on investment? So lots of sponsorship deals and seeing how money can translate from measurement, which was pretty cool. Then I went over to, wanted to learn how to do business development. And that was with a company called Mission Critical, which was in the market research space. We're building online community panels now called Alita. Still there, still going strong. And I was doing new market development with them. So I worked across a number of different markets. So I learned how measurement not only changes, but also the insight and value of continual feedback with different groups in different countries can lead to different types of success and outcomes within businesses. I thought that was super interesting. And that's where I got a real first flavor of how a market researcher and a data guru could actually play their role within an organization to serve a number of different stakeholders. And then that's where I first met somebody around neuroscience, where we got into the, what if we could use video cameras, webcams, and we're not using it on this call. We only use it with permission. But how do we use video cams, webcams, microphones, that type of stuff to get body language or behavioral AI today is what it's called. And 11 years ago, my co-founder Diego and I started on that journey and started to bring emotional models to everyday practitioners, which it's now currently being used to help build standards in standardized measurement in the creator economy, which is a heavily fragmented space of influencer marketing. And so it's been an interesting journey, but yeah, we love it.
There's so much newness and kind of cutting edge stuff that you're working on. Creator economy, one could argue it's not new, but it's accelerated a lot in the last few years, right? And in terms of
it has eerily. So the creator economy is about, let's roughly 500 million people talking to 4.2 billion people on a daily basis. So when you look at it from a data transfer, a human interaction, a human experience perspective, I thought that's probably the most amount of human interactions or experiences of any industry on the planet. There's very few that have more touch points that actually have a machine interface in the middle. Now, by putting machine interface in the middle, you can capture a lot of information. And that's what's really interesting. And information that has a lot of inference
Hmm.
that we don't have in other data sources like surveys
Right.
or things like that. Now, capturing is one thing, making sense of it is a whole other thing.
Oh yeah.
And so that's been the 11-year journey, I would say. Um, what also is interesting, what strikes me as interesting about the creator economy. So we support kind of companies like Whaler, Omnicom,
Yep.
Influencer to build measurement systems. So what really strikes me is the eerily similar problem and use case to sponsorship of celebrities and individuals that we had at
Yep.
IMG in the early noughties. So same type of thing. I'm going to spend a lot of money on this creator, on this
Right.
influencer, and I need to measure what happens between the view and the click. And I have
Yep.
no idea how it's contributing to my brand. And so that's a big question that's on the hearts and minds of marketers these days.
Yeah, and I think also, it's about the click, but it's also about the people who don't press the click, right? And
There's very few
understanding,
categories that go to click right away. Most
right?
categories or most of the marketing funnel that's click-based attribution is right at the tail end of building the brand.
Yep.
So sometimes you get trended stuff, and some categories move fast. Sometimes certain deals, like where there's exclusivity in a market or something like that, where you can
Yeah.
only buy
Either
100 of
or.
these, like
Right.
vehicles, you
Exactly.
see that.
Yeah. Hmm.
But equally in automotive, you also see 1 to 2 year buying cycles from first exposure of an
Or
electric vehicle from Ford all the way through to buying the Mustang EV.
yep.
And
That may
so,
that's actually would be an interesting something to track, like going from your standard car to getting an electrical vehicle.
eh, yeah,
Interesting. Okay, so let's talk about, you have some uh a very strong perspective about research.
I
Can you
do.
please share that? Yeah.
Yeah. So, because I'm not a traditional researcher, and I've grown up around them, where we worked in this whole market research
Yeah.
industry, that a practice that's like 65 years old has has a number of governing
Mhm.
bodies, but ESOMAR being kind of one big global one, and then you've got a Market Research Society in the UK, and then a number in the US, and across different cultures, you have different research practices that are ethical guidelines and methodologies. What's very interesting is with the emergence of technology, what we're seeing, and we saw this early days in Mission Critical, was this thing called rogue research, where you'd have a salesperson adapt a SurveyMonkey tool and then just fire in a poll to their
Yeah, yeah.
friends, you
Yeah.
know. And it's like, okay, I mean, but there's a lot of bias in how you ask that question. You asked a question that was going to be answered the way you wanted it to. And but the reality is that curiosity isn't owned by any one rule
Mhm.
within an organization. And particularly in marketing, where there's a lot of questions getting asked, research is more of a function, not a role. So our premise and one of the guiding principles of our business is, how do we just put the people first always? And our people, we work a lot with research teams, but a
Mhm.
lot of them like working with us because one person can have a lot more scale and impact within an organization, because a lot of the tooling we provide them with can be used by someone who's making 25, 35 grand a year, has to just
Yeah.
make a decision, and they want to make it from an informed stance so they don't lose their job, or so they can look good in front of their boss or whatever it is. And so that really is actually the problem that anybody, I believe, in the insights and research space or the data space, that's our job.
Yeah.
Effectively, we're effectively kind of managing a marketplace, and our
Right.
job is to make that data as easily accessible and usable as possible by people who are non-researchers, so anyone can ask their question. And if you get the curiosity of the masses, you can open up huge conversations and discussions
Mhm.
and massive opportunities. And so that's how we view it. So research is more of a function, on a role. And
Yeah.
I think you'll note kind of the top business leaders in the world have an element of curiosity and always know how to do really good
Yeah.
research.
Yeah. But
They
it's
have an
also not,
instinct for it.
yeah, and I also would say that curiosity doesn't just lie in research, right? Like there's
No.
curiosity across the board and finance data and sales data and everything else. But I
Yeah.
agree with you. Like curiosity could be, I have a question, I want to go get it answered. I don't have to go to five other people to run a study and then get the answer. I think if I interpret what you're saying appropriately.
Yeah, a little bit. Exactly. A little bit like that. The other one is, and there's so much value in knowing the right question to ask, which
Yes.
is, this is where I see, so we're kind of seeing a lot of our clients and some of our some of the stuff that we saw in the past, and we're seeing in the industry is this divergence. You have researchers who are kind of moving towards insights and strategy. So they're like, I'm going to be really
Yes.
good at getting the right tool in front of the right people,
Hmm.
and then helping those people learn how to ask really good questions
Hmm.
that will get them real actionable information. Because research isn't the research is kind of a means to an
It's
end. It's a tool,
listening,
right?
answer the question, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But if you ask the wrong question, you're
Yeah.
not going to have much to action on the back end. So
Yeah.
it starts with the briefing. And a lot of we've had clients come to us and say, great, you do behavioral AI, attention, emotion, memory data. Great, I need attention data. I'm like, okay, why do you need attention data? And they're
Yeah.
immediately like,
I don't know.
well, because I need to know beyond the view. Well, what are you trying to know beyond the view?
Yeah.
There might be better ways to do this, and quite frankly, less expensive ways to do this. So, or faster, or
Right.
whatever it is. What's the business problem here? And so, teaching people how to assess the business problem and ask the right question.
Mm.
That's where, I think researchers become really impactful and effective,
Mhm.
and that's where the role then empowers the function within
Yes.
everybody else.
Yes. So, just kind of keying off that, why do people want to know about attention data?
Oh yeah, I mean, quite frankly, our managing director, Dr. Hamish McFarland, so ex BBC, CNN, built kind of the measurement programs there in aspects of the commercial groups. And what he likes to quote something called the four horsemen of the ad apocalypse.
Okay.
And it basically is, and I love it because
Yeah.
just because you have an impression and a view doesn't mean somebody looked at it. And
Right.
quite frankly, we're incredibly visually stimulated as human beings in our day to day lives. And so um, we need to first understand if somebody looked at it. Then we need to understand, did somebody actually take it in, react to it? Did they
Mm.
remember it? And we found a lot of correlation between the intensity of the expressional
About
response.
the facial. Yep.
Yeah, I think expressional response. Well, I'll come on to emotion in a
Sure.
second. The intensity of the expressional response uh, to the memorability, and then the memorability to purchase intent. So
Okay.
it's about actually saying, I mean, 99% of ads get viewed,
Yes.
but don't get clicked. So the real question is what's happening to
What's
the
happening with the other 90
what's
the
happening to
90%?
that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. What's
Right.
happening to that whole funnel there?
Mhm.
And so, real world human behavior response gives us a glimpse into that. It's a complementary data set to kind of the viewability, the click
Yeah.
metric, and the survey metrics. What's actually happened? So it's the qualifiers. It's what you would get out of a focus group or an interview or some sort of
Sure.
observation technique. But at massive, so our job has been, again, make it available for the masses. So at massive scale. So now people can, in our case, they can load up a piece of content. I mean, it's a good one. I had to demo to a client and they forgot to send me the campaign they wanted to see it show off. And so they sent it to me 10 hours before the presentation.
Uh-huh.
And it was 3 studies in Australia, was able to upload it, send it across, get the response out, the report done by the time the presentation happened, just
Wow.
to show off the power of the tool. And so we've worked really hard to just package that all up and make it super fast. Because in influencer marketing,
Yeah.
you need under 24-hour turnaround times. So that's just because after that, horses out
It's
of the barn.
the trend just dies off. It's like a hula hoop. It goes up and
Uh,
maybe not a hula
Can,
hoop, but like
can
why
do
does
for trending
yeah.
stuff, but again, a lot of influencer marketing, like these brand collaborations, and that's where a brand dollars represent a huge portion of the commerce for influencers and
Got it.
creators.
Okay.
So they need to know. There's also a brand protection element. Is it
Right.
going the wrong way? Did we miss? Did we think? Did the brand message dictate too much, and the creator themselves lost authenticity with their own audience? Which audience is performing better? So we use attention data. Kind of attention is one aspect, one output of our behavioral data. So we look at kind of on one axis, we look at kind of percentile rank
Yeah.
of we call it stopping power. So when people go into a feed, we've built private feeds, so they look at it, and there are tons of distractors in there. when they go into a feed, how much attention do they pay to it?
Right.
So does it stop them in feed?
Mhm.
And then the staying power is very much, it goes along the other side, which is around, if it did stop them, how memorable was their content for those that stopped? And
And
so
that's
we're even,
survey data? The step
it's
part?
observed with webcam data. So it is a
Ah,
recruited audience into
okay.
a private environment. It's a mock environment. It looks and feels like Facebook or
Got
TikTok
it.
or
Got
Instagram
it.
or whatever your
Yeah,
environment that you're producing
sure.
on. And then the audience looks exactly like the audiences that you have. And we've done side by side tests with the audiences you have,
Mhm.
so the weights are in the right place. And then that allows a brand to say, okay, great, here's my stopping power, here's my staying power, and here's what's working really well. And of course, every single test that's added in from all of our partners gets aggregated into a benchmark. So you know today how you're doing. And if you want to test next week, you can test how you're doing. If you want to give the diagnostic feedback to the creator to say, really nailed it with the storyline, but
Right.
not for the brand.
You might
So
wanna tweak.
captured
Yes.
all the
Yeah,
attention, but can you get the brand front and center? And if
got
you
it.
do, we can give you more media dollars. So
Got
here
it.
you go.
That's cool.
So
So
it breaks
you're
up this
you
cycle.
are you are in the activation space. You are helping media buyers determine how to kind of tweak their messaging, how to and work with
The
creators.
content in context.
Correct.
So where most attention providers play, and they're very good at, quite
Yeah,
frankly, I'd say the best ones out there are not us. And they're very much in the media buying space. So
got
they
it.
will be able to
Okay.
give you a weighting
Yeah.
based off of of the inventory value. They're very focused on the contextual element of that.
Mm.
We focus on the content
Mhm.
inside that context. So we focus on the actual story, the actual interaction, where people are looking, where they're expressing, what
Mhm.
are the key moments, cut it down, extend it, all that type of stuff. So we focus on the real nature of the creative and the content
Uh,
inside the context of TikTok or
got
Instagram or
it.
Facebook or
Okay.
YouTube or
Yep.
wherever.
That makes sense.
So
And
even this, if we wanted to put this on, we could take
yeah.
the 5-minute clip of this and run it to make sure we get the right type of hook and reel that we want on there
Oh, that'd be
and to
fun.
boost viewership. Yeah.
That'd be fun.
So why not? Yeah.
Yeah. Actually talking about that, I was like, I know we said you collect a ton of data, but
Yeah.
one like on a YouTube, how many data points on an individual would you collect? Privacy, obviously it's anonymized. You're not like
Yeah.
reporting
Yeah.
anything, but
Yeah.
give me a sense of how much data does that involve?
Yeah. So for when a creator looks at a YouTube video and they'll get a bunch of feedback
Yeah.
points like drop off points
Yeah.
and likes, comments, all that type of stuff, and it's very rich data, right?
Mhm.
All this platform interaction data is very rich from an
Right.
engagement perspective, but it's not contextualized. Again, how is
Yeah.
the audience actually experiencing it? Are they just trying to get
Yes.
through it? Are they skipping? What are they doing? And or are they even looking at it, or is it on a second screen and they're actually just looking out there the whole time?
Yeah.
So um so what we offer is for every kind of like, there's about 10,000 data points per individual, and then there's 150 to 250 individuals that look at the content on our test. So you're into some pretty serious data points, and very
Incredible.
rich data, very
Yeah.
very rich data, because you're taking about anywhere between 256 to 1,000 data points a frame at 30 frames a second. And so you just like this incredibly, and it's something that even as a human moderator observer, you can't do.
You can't
It's
pick it
just
up.
really
Yeah.
hard. Like
Yeah.
you can be the top trained FBI psychologist out there. Just,
Right.
okay, I missed this minor
Yeah.
tweak. Well, of course you did.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
not what we were trained to do. What you can do is interpret it, and humans are very good at interpretation, much better than machines. Machines are much better at looking for signals that correlate with other things or
Yeah.
looking for signals that predict other things.
So the interesting point, I think, is that you collect all this data, but
It,
the result is quite simple. Not simple, but it's robust and it's in terms of the data that informs the results, but it's pretty easy to kind of digest and consume for somebody who's looking at the data.
I mean, it only took 11 years.
Yeah. Well,
Mm.
that's
Well,
entrepreneurship, right?
yeah, I mean, you should have seen the initial data graphs that we had going
Yeah.
through there, and it was just like you look at it, and go like, I, d- what's even
Yeah, what's happening here?
relevant. What? So have you ever seen, when you see kind of like a voice note
Yeah.
or a song that has like all
Yes.
these kind of,
Can
and
see
you
that.
see
Yeah.
it on, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what visual data can articulate as. That's one visualization
Mm.
of kind of the emotional time series and expressional time series. And that's why when he comes, like I said, I come on to emotions themselves are still in a bit of an interesting space of development.
Okay.
There is a little bit of an agreement and disagreement around universality of emotions, and like we all have the exact same expression. I disagree with that
I
personally. I
disagree with
haven't
that
seen any
too.
data to
Yeah.
prove that,
Yeah.
and so we don't necessarily focus on. Some customers ask us to classify into emotional states these 6 general Ekman states. I think what I really appreciate about that model is that it got everybody talking about it and made it adoptable.
Mm.
Problem with that model is that from a data perspective, it just
Mm.
doesn't provide the consistency, way too much variability. So where we started, and I'm not saying we have the answer yet. I don't think
Yeah.
anybody does. And I haven't seen a really good use case out there, but we started really focusing on the individual and normalizing on the individual and looking for how much their expressionalism deviates from the norm.
That's
And we
interesting.
find that to be incredibly
Yeah.
insightful, much more so than, and that's why we focus on expression first. And it's the
Yeah.
general expression. It's less about what the emotion's classified about. And it's much more about the intensity of emotion.
That makes perfect sense because as soon as you said that, I think about ethnicity and culture. We all,
Right.
right? We're taught differently to express ourselves.
And even, I mean, the best example of this, I was initially
Yeah.
introducing this capability in the UK and I was showing it around and immediately just had expats who come back from overseas and said,
Yeah.
oh, this would never work in Asia. So I said, okay.
Yeah.
So I joined the UK Trade Commission and went to Xingdao in China.
Yep.
I'm probably butchering that name. So apologies
Yep.
to
No
all of the Mandarin speakers out there.
problem.
Um, so, so we went out there and then I literally ran it and the system had no problem picking it up, but absolutely correct. Did I
Yeah.
have an issue picking it up? Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
But it's just because I haven't grown up around
Right.
that particular
Yeah.
individual. And so it just went to prove, even within like 2 or 3 seconds, you
Mm.
have a much stronger understanding of somebody than somebody who's seeing them for the first time. And this is where the whole business model is built off of. If we could provide a very safe environment for people to interact safely with
Mhm.
machines, with a responsive AI, we could build a layer of empathy within inside that interaction.
Mm.
But more importantly, we can also empower this data back to the individual, like we did those cross country runners.
Right.
So that then they can manage their time. They can have an alarm come up and say, it's doom scrolling on
Yeah.
TikTok. And this is where
That would
the
be
data gets
amazing.
really exciting.
Yeah.
This is where
Yeah.
it gets really exciting.
Like nudges, right? Like, hey, listen, you've been
Yeah,
doing this for
this is what I'm
no
observing.
judgment.
Do
Right.
with it what you want to do with
Yeah.
it. That's fine. I'm observing every time you're on this call with an individual, and you see this expression happens on the other person,
Yeah.
or this lull happens, you tend to do X.
That's
I mean,
amazing. Right?
I personally would
Yeah.
love that. So selfishly, I'm kind of building this for myself first, and then if anybody else wants to join the
That's
crew,
really, I know, I love that. That's great. So
yeah,
let's talk about this because I know that, we talked about two things. Number one, younger generation really
yeah,
being focused on authenticity.
yeah.
And they can sniff out authenticity or lack of immediately. And it's a really critical component. How are you seeing that play out in the data? Like, give us a little bit of a sense of some of the trends you see.
Yeah, so the biggest one is so we started tracking authenticity 3, 4 years ago. Um, trustworthiness, and authenticity were the 2 brand traits we were looking for,
Yeah.
and we put them in as implicit brand traits. So it's a implicit reaction time test
Hmm.
that we baked into the tool. So Tinder for brands, as we like to call it,
Yeah. Got it. Yeah.
and it is very interesting to see how authenticity and engagement kind of start to link together, and also how authenticity and some of the brand metrics like uplift,
Hmm.
that type of performance starts to link together. So, but we have seen, and Hamish has done
Hmm.
an expose on this around kind of the power of authenticity.
Right.
And I mean, look, I think everybody and their brother in the marketing industry said and can like, okay, authenticity it's been beaten to death. I actually really hasn't. And what I think has been missed entirely is that as a marketing industry and a media marketing industry,
Mhm.
we have flooded the market with so much content, particularly in the influencer marketing space,
Mhm.
that again, I go back to 500 million people
Yeah.
daily talking to 4.2 billion people.
Yeah.
Not so many actual interactions are happening. So what has notably happened for those that spend the most amount of time on social media is they're getting a real good nose or
Mm.
sense. I call it a
Yeah.
nose, a
Yeah.
sense,
Sense
mainly
of
because I have a
what's
massive nose.
authentic and
But
what's
yes,
not. Yeah.
yes, they're getting a real good kind of sense for what's authentic, what's not, and particularly, especially as we start to see advertising standards get into the influencer space, because we're seeing that as well, right? With some of the more recent stuff that's happened with Stephen Bartlett, well, he's actually an investor here and he's also promoting the product. He's not allowed to
Yeah.
do that, or he hasn't been
Yeah.
very clear on that. It's like, well, interesting, because I'd say his content's very authentic. He
Right.
believes in the product. He bought the
Yeah.
product. He bought shares in the product, and he went ahead and did it. But it puts a huge question mark around authenticity. Do we moderate for it? How do creators make sure they don't lose themselves when they take a brand brief?
Mm.
How do we teach brands how to brief so that the creator's authenticity goes through? Because the creator's number one driver is still audience growth, right?
Yeah.
Audience growth and
For
engagement.
sure. Yeah.
Because without it, they don't have a
They
brand.
don't have it. Right. They have not. Yeah. That's the
Exactly. So
platform.
when a brand comes in, then it says, cool, some agency manager has to go, okay, I'm thinking of this great strategy. And then they literally hit up. And I talk a lot with creators. And
Yeah.
the creators go, so then I just get this force fed what I have to say because of the brand
Yeah.
guidelines.
Yeah.
And it is so jarring with my
Right.
audience
Yeah.
because they have no, like, they're like, this is, you're
Yeah.
clearly paid to do this. Just tell us you're paid to do this because you need to make money. And that's cool. We'll
Yeah.
accept it as such. I'll probably skip it, but we'll accept it as such.
Right. Yeah. I didn't even know that they had awards. I I learned recently they had awards for people who read live ads on podcasts the best.
Yeah.
Yeah, that I had no idea. I was like, wow. They said that anyway. I won't mention the podcast. I listened to a few, but they were celebrating the fact that they won an award for it. I'm like, wow. I wouldn't even have thought of that. Right?
Yeah.
It's a paid ad. They felt authentic in the way that they read the ad.
If,
Um, so let's talk about, you know, guardrails around this
mm,
whole digital world. And you mentioned empathy before, but how do you like we're in a two-way dialogue virtually versus being in a
mm.
physical room. How do you view the differences there?
So when you actually dig into psychological definitions of emotion, one of them is it is environmental. It's that sense, that feeling you have in a
Yeah.
room, in a space. And if you've ever been if you've ever been close to a crime or been in a crowd that's gotten riotous,
Yeah.
you could feel it. You literally,
Yeah.
there's an
Your
electricity in
body
the air. You could feel,
reacts. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
you're like, ooh, something's
Yeah.
going
Yeah.
on. I
Yeah.
actually don't
Yeah.
even know what it is, but something's going on. Yeah, and or I mean, just around spatially. So
Sure.
there is that element. I mean, I think like there's a few things that I think are going to be true. One, I think the human in 5 years is not the human today, and we're going to be drastically augmented, whether it be through external devices or internal devices, one or the other. We humans will always selfishly try to advance their capability,
Mm.
and by any means possible, and don't blame them. I should.
Yeah.
And so I think from that perspective, though, the machines that are here to help us are still relatively crude, and I say that kind of with the knowledge of what LLMs could do,
Yeah.
and what these chat bots could do, and that type of stuff. And frankly, they're crude. We've made incredible strides of breakthrough, but we're now getting to the point. I'm also the firm belief that we will always make kind of technology in our image. So there's an element of that. And then finally, this social media and social interaction and creating these kind of public town halls where you can hide a little bit behind your opinion and
Right.
kind of de-escalation effect starts to
Yes.
happen. I, I believe two things. I believe we've kind of lost the art of discussion.
Fair. I agree with that.
In 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 a sense that we've forgotten how to listen,
Mm-hmm.
and it's incredible what happens when you learn how to listen,
Mm-hmm.
because the reflection moment takes sense. There's space,
Yeah.
and you tend to see. I mean, just look at any of the top performing teams out there.
Yeah.
They are acutely good at both listening and
Mm-hmm.
feeding back.
Mm-hmm.
And what we haven't done is we haven't embedded that feedback loop into our devices. So we're
Mm.
interacting with these devices, we're interacting through these devices, but we actually we've removed this tactical emotional sense that allows us to have a real strong bond and empathetic response to somebody on the other side. But it doesn't this current device doesn't allow us to do that.
Yeah.
This current device is, I will
There's
show you the
something
video. Now
different.
you have to
Yeah.
do all of it. So I
Correct.
use my hands a lot.
Right.
We get colorful, we get expressive. We put blurred on the background so you can
Right.
focus on the face, all that stuff. But the reality is that we haven't done that. And so my firm belief, and particularly in the world of artificial intelligence is highly generative, which is great.
Sure.
It
Right.
helps. And frankly, from a thinking and assistive tool for what I'm trying to create, oh my God, I love it. It is
Mm.
so good. It has saved me hours of like, help me synthesize what's
Right.
happening. Here's what I think's happening. What would the counterpoints be?
Yep.
How do I negotiate something? Here's
Yep.
where, like, all that type of stuff is great. And but it's not great because it does the work. It's great because it changes the way I think.
Right.
And I think that's really good. So now the second step to that, though, not everything's logical. So, and that particular type of uh, artificial intelligence is very big model oriented. You're
Mm-hmm.
talking, billions of data points that have to be crunched to get a good model out. But what about the individual effect? I am still different than you. We can both
Yes.
use an LLM, but I'm
Yes.
still different than you. And what something emotionally means to you will mean something very different emotionally to
Yeah.
me, because our memories are different, our experiences are different. So how do we build some guardrails around this AI saying this is the way? Rather, give the AI a feedback loop that says this is the way for this person,
Right.
but actually didn't land so well for that person. So keep iterating. Like, you got a job to do. If
Mm-hmm.
you want to be this most generative person in the room,
Sure.
then be that.
Yeah.
But know that you're having an impact on somebody. And this gets us away from, I think we could be a lot more sensitive as organizations, particularly as we have more and more reach and breadth
Yeah.
to the individual consumers who are using our capabilities, and a lot more respectful to the exposure that they're having, particularly with
Mm-hmm.
their information, their data. And I believe that is where the emotional guardrails come in. So I am going to, for the rest of my life, always work on getting better and better understanding of humans
Yes.
for the individuals.
Yep.
And yes, that'll ladder up for corporate interests and all that type of stuff. But as long as the individuals have the control, I'm kind of happy with
You
it.
feel good
And
about it. You feel like, listen, you're enriching.
I can go to
The
sleep at
lives
night.
are
And
enriched. Right.
speaking about that trip um, to China, it was quite an eye opener,
Yeah.
because at that point, some of the Chinese companies in the biometric space were not around in their early doors,
Mm-hmm.
and we were asked to go take a look at some of that
Mm-hmm.
stuff that ended up in social credit scoring, and I'm like, that is not where
Yeah.
we need to
Yeah.
be going.
Yeah.
At, that is not a rising tide raises all
Yeah.
boats. That is, in my view. And so that's why that's why I said to my co-founder, I said, we got to try and figure this out
Yeah.
from a
In a
different
different
kind of
way. Yeah.
space. And how do we, if we can give this to everybody, then everybody's
Sure.
empowered with their own VO2
Yeah.
max, if you will, but for
Yes.
emotions.
That's cool. So I just want to clarify something. So people who participate in
Eh,
the research, if you will,
Yeah.
do they get feedback on themselves as well? Like what do they
Yeah.
get
You go to sleep.
feedback?
Nobody gets that feedback. So what we do is we take the person identifiable
Yeah.
data, and then we create, our models create a bunch of vectors underneath that.
Got it.
And then those vectors are not identifiable. You can't.
Got it. Yeah, yeah, of course.
And then we look for commonalities in those vectors. And then what we do is, from there, customers like Twitch, who publicly talked about this, they then kind of link it to things like video completion rate. And so they
Got
say video completion rate's important to us. We say, here's the survey data. Now here's what we're also pulling from the biometrics. But it's all learning feedback loop. So whatever organizations we work with, it's what data is important to you. We're going to provide you the standard stuff. You get the survey data, all that type of stuff. And whatever other data you want to bring in, and we're going to bring this behavioral data as well, and make that a learning ecosystem.
We are truly in the world of big data.
We are, but this is actually what I call small data because, well, not I call it.
Everybody does, yeah.
Yeah, I would say this is the misnomer about emotions. This isn't a lot of the emotion providers out there are still stuck in this kind of, you have to classify, you have to train, you have to boil the ocean. We kind of take a little bit of a more individualistic approach. You are your own algorithm and you are your own model, and you just need cross comparability across the models. So we look at it from bottom up rather than top down. So it's not big data down to small data. We look at it for small data, ladder it up into big data.
Got it. Well, Matt, I congratulate you on all that you're working on. It sounds fascinating.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I look forward to keeping in touch with you.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me over here. It's a very, very fun topic to talk about.
Honestly, I feel like we could talk for hours. So
Probably.
I appreciate you taking
I know I can.
Yeah.
But my wife tries to tell me off about that.
Take care. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Sima.